Right, good morning everyone. I've put the session on for record, so you'll be able to watch it in Howler afterwards. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at some of the case studies we've got, and we're going to apply and work out which tools would be useful for each of the managers. I'll open up the chat facility as well, so that if your microphones aren't working and you want to contribute, please do. I'll also just take a snapshot now on the call, so got that for our register. So just a second, just do that. Okay. Right. So this was on FutureLearn, and we've got it's on the section now where we're starting to look at the variety of tools that we can use to help us make decisions. So this is just an application exercise to make sure you understand the tools and you'll be able to talk about them in your assignment as relevant. So we've got three different executives in this scenario where we're looking at which tools they might want to use. So we've got Lisa to start off with, and she's the office manager at a manufacturing company. They're looking at putting a huge amount of money into one of the manufacturing sites to change their production process. And so she's been asked if she should, whether or not they should go ahead with their change. So what I'm going to do now is going to revisit the tools that she's got available, and I'd like you to say which ones you think she should use. Okay, so the first one is forecasting, where she's looking ahead both numerically and also with opinions to try and work out sort of potentially the financial returns. It's a really very complex process, potentially forecasting is, and there are a number of different techniques that she could use to do it. Some people believe uncertainty means it's less effective, but it's something where you're looking ahead and you're gathering data to inform whether or not you should make a decision. So which of you think that Lisa, do you think forecasting is a good tool for Lisa to use or not? What's your thoughts on that? Okay, just one sec. Okay, Kaylee. Right. So what we're doing, okay, is that any? Let me just check. Is that any better? I think it's just where my microphone was at. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Right. So we're looking at different managers and we're looking at different tools, and what we're doing is we're matching for decision making tools which manager should use which tool. So we're starting off with Lisa, who is part of a large global organisation, but she's office manager at a production unit, and she's looking at whether or not to invest in some substantial investment which will alter the production process. So that's her scenario. So she's been asked for her input as to whether to go ahead with the change. So the first tool that we're going to look at, should she use, is one called forecasting. So forecasting is where you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at the trends, you're looking ahead basically with as much information as you can get to see whether, to try and predict the future. So you can do it numerically with calculations, you can look at expert views in terms of the industry. So you've got qualitative, which is opinions, or you've got quantitative, which is the numbers. Do you think one of the things that Lisa should do, what do you think about forecasting in terms of should she do it to decide whether or not to make that change to the production process and that investment? Go on, Emily.
I think with forecasting that it's not very reliable because something unpredictable could happen in the future and the conditions could be different.
Absolutely. And so one of the key challenges is just how can we tell that we've got stability? However, what's the alternative then, Emily, if we don't forecast? Have you got any ideas what else?
I think you could forecast, but you just have to be very aware that it could constantly be changing.
Yeah. And that's probably going to depend on the nature of the industry you're in as well, isn't it, in terms of the speed of change and the influences on it. But I think you're absolutely right. I think without forecasting, it's seeming like you've got no substance on which to base that decision. So you possibly need something, but it's almost with some caveats in terms of using it as the only way forward, because if those variables change, then you're basing it on just one aspect. So forecasting, we think use, but use with caution. Okay, the next one is a decision tree. So a decision tree is where you've got a visual and you decide, say in the step, it's got the idea of whether we're going to do a family visit, are we going to go to lunch, does it depend on whether, it's got basically, you've got an option at each point, you've got at each point of the decision you've got two options, so it keeps on, like, so invest, it could be yes or no. If it's yes, what are you considering then? So it's so it sort of branches out decision. It's very logical because it looks at the consequences of whether you go down one route or another route, and it's a conceptual map, it's visual, and it sort of looks very scientific, but isn't necessarily the case because it depends what you put down on there. Do you think a decision tree is relevant in this situation in terms of whether we're going to make a significant investment to improve production processes?
Maybe if they've done something like this before, it could be helpful because they've got past experiences with it.
Okay, so they'll know, won't they, at each point what the potential consequences were, looking historically if they've done something similar. That's a good point. How comfortable, have you actually seen the step on Future Learn of the decision tree and seen the example? Has anyone had a look?
Yeah.
How simple do you think it would be? Like, how comfortable would you feel using it?
Probably quite comfortable because it's a logical process and you're just following the answers, really.
Okay. And for an organisation that's very bureaucratic, what are the sort of implications of doing something like that?
I'm not sure.
So basically, you follow the rules, don't you? By doing that, you're covering yourself. So as a manager, I think this is more, would you be more comfortable using this than forecasting?
Possibly, because this kind of appears more structured.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, you know, when we've gone back to that session where we looked at like decision making that was based almost on the book, wasn't it, where organisations have programmed decisions, this sort of fits into that, doesn't it, in the sense of if there's a precedent with what they've done in the past. So I think it could be good. Does anyone else got any thoughts on this? Kaylee, is your dog being quiet yet? Are you able to speak, or Grace, or Callum, anyone, Tom, with a speaker? A microphone. Oh, Kaylee, good.
Yeah, my dog's shut up now.
Good.
People were walking past, or not. Apparently, he barks at ghosts. I think the decision tree and the other one, whatever it is, that's the
forecasting.
I think they could work well together to make a massive. If it's a big decision like it is, I think you could work out your pros and cons using both of them.
Yes, and you could use the forecasting to inform it, couldn't you? The decision tree.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So we've got two that we could use. I think the only thing with the decision tree is it could be simplified depending on what you put in there. So it's like with any decision making model, it's what you know, rubbish in, rubbish out. So we've got to have some solid foundations. Next one we've got cost benefit analysis. So this is where we're looking at the returns. So if we pay £1 million in the investment, how much are we looking to get back and within what time period? So it's a way of attributing a financial figure to the investment. How relevant do you think that is in this? So back to what we're doing, we're investing in something that's going to change our manufacturing processes significantly. How relevant do you think cost benefit analysis will be? Do you think the senior managers in our organisation would like to see a cost benefit analysis before going ahead? Yeah. And why would they? So Kaylee said yes, that I think they would. What does that give them? Or what? How does that support the argument? Anyone else? Can anyone switch on their speaker and yes, so you can see your expected sales, but more than that, you can see, well, you can see where you draw even on it. So if you produce so many units extra, at what point does the cost, or potential losses, but we can see, we get an idea of timescales in which we're going to potentially lose the money and then recover it again. Are there any limitations to a cost benefit analysis that you can think of? Oh, can I, Tom, are you able to contribute if you got your microphone? Just to try and, yep, don't have the correct figures. What else? So we might not have the correct figures. It's what Emily said at the beginning in terms of forecasting and moving ahead. We don't necessarily know. Certainly, yep, the data that we've got or forecasting. Okay, Tom. Well, thanks for replying. Is there any limits with just looking at numbers in order to make decisions? Can everything be costed? Can you think of anything that they might not cost when they're making that decision, if they're using the cost benefit analysis? Yeah, so we could have different, so we could even things like the unit prices or the labour prices or things like that could be different. So we might not have accurate data because of that. But I'm thinking, yeah, opinions. So it's what people feel about the change in the process. I mean, is there potentially going to be more stress on people? Have we costed in a learning curve? So in other words, that people's production might slow down before they speed up with the new processes. Yeah, we might not have, it depends, doesn't it, if we've still got the same products that we're making, but unless we've got the same demand for the products, we're going to struggle here as well, because we might make extra units, but can we actually sell them? I'm trying to think what else. But cost benefit analysis works really well on just a very logical sort of business case point of view, but actually on the softer side, in terms of the cultural changes, the fear that people might have, they might only have 6 more months in their job and actually they don't want to learn a new way of doing things. It might mean that people are scared that they're going to be made redundant, so that could reduce morale. So there's softer factors that actually in cost benefit analysis we're not always going to quantify, and also there are potentially quite a lot of costs and potential benefits we might miss. For example, a potential benefit we might have is not just increasing our volume of production, but it might allow us to do some different things that we haven't even realised yet until we do it. So with everything, it's quite different to get the full picture of what it provides. Okay, now the next one that we've got in our sort of armoury, our toolkit, is Porter's 5 forces. So this is where we're looking at the power and influences on the organisation and whether these are going to impact and how much they impact. And so I want you to think, is this one relevant or not? So the sorts of things we're looking at here are the bargaining power of buyers, the bargaining power of suppliers, threat of substitutes, new entrants. Do you think that's going to be of any relevance to Lisa's decision making on the new equipment? Would you take that into account, these different power variables and influences on the organisation? Go on, Emily.
Maybe the threat of competition, because if there's already something like that out there in another company, they may be doing better.
Yes. Okay. So we could look at what else they're doing, and Kaylee supported you on that in terms of if there's a similar market or brand. So we want to see what else they're doing and the power they've got. Bargaining. Okay, yep. So we think really it's competitor based. Does anything else like new entrants, would that impact your decision? Out of all of them that I've mentioned so far, do you think where would you rank Porter's 5 forces in terms of using it to make the decision? Do you think it's high up there? It's one of the first things you use, or would it be one of the sort of lowest things in terms of priority?
I think maybe a bit lower down because it doesn't take into account the data of the product and where it could be in the future.
Yes, I think it's one of the lower ones that we'd potentially use. I agree. What do we reckon about a pestle analysis? So this is where we're looking at the political environments, the economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. Do you think Lisa should consider that when she looks at her decision whether she's sort of supporting the decision to invest or not?
Yeah, probably, because it would take into account any changes in the environment, which would have an effect on the company.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, Curly said yeah, and a SWOT too, and the SWOT was the next one I was going to look at. So the SWOT feeds into the pestle. So the strengths and weaknesses are internal, and then the opportunities and threats, you could actually divide those down into the pestle because they're all external. Grace has just said she thinks Porter's 5 forces should be used for entering a new market. I think, yeah, that tends to be where it's used. So actually, that has, out of all the tools, if we're only able to use a few, I think Porter's 5 forces would be less relevant. But I think Emily's point about considering what the competition are doing is really important. So I agree there, Grace. Pestle SWOT analysis. So looking at our strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, what are the limitations? Every assignment I see tends to have a SWOT analysis in there, but what's the limitations of a SWOT? How useful do you think they are for organisations? Okay, who should complete the SWOT? Who actually provides the information for one?
I think, is it the managers that decide their strengths and weaknesses, which could be quite biased?
Exactly, that's what I'm getting at. So they tend to be used really like because they're quite a straightforward one to use. I think there's a risk of overusing them. However, the bias in it is just the potential for it, unless you've got a good cross section of people using it. I mean, a fantastic SWOT would involve your customers using it as well, your suppliers potentially contributing to it as well. So you have this almost like a 360-degree perspective on how you're performing as an organisation. So I think there's a real risk with SWOTs that they are used as the answer, but actually they have too much strategic influence, whereas they are not founded on a sort of a really good analysis. If you were to only use a SWOT or a pestle, which one would you go for and why? Which do you think has more value to an organisation?
Probably pestle, because I feel like you could get more accurate data with it because it's based on things that are actually happening.
Yes, I agree. I think there's less scope for bias in a pestle. Also, just an assignment tip, for a pestle, you have so many opportunities to get external sources in there. And please use that if you're going to use it, because use it as a tool. You could be getting like I don't know, 5 or 6 different sources that you're using and referencing, and that's just the most fantastic opportunity to get increased marks. If you're not careful, a PESTL's used in exactly the same way as a SWOT, in that it's just biased information without being founded on anything. But yeah, I think a PESTL is more comprehensive actually as well, isn't it, in terms of the areas that it's looking at. And I think because of its breadth, you're more likely to look for external evidence to support it. Now, a feasibility study is our other tool that we've potentially got. And this one is where we're looking at, it's a planning tool that we use when developing a business plan. And you start to look at the size of the market, suppliers, distributors, and entrepreneurs use it to see whether their idea is viable. Based on what I've just told you, do you think that's relevant to the decision that Lisa has to make? Do you? Okay, yeah. Why do you think that would be useful then, the feasibility study? What additional, what would it give her or the organisation?
With this, they may only be like analysing the relevant information, which will cut out anything that they don't need.
Okay, yeah. And Kaylee supports that with saying that she'd have a better understanding as they're entering as a company. So you're almost looking at them doing something new, aren't you? So I think it was Grace mentioned earlier about Porter's 5 forces for entering a new market. I think feasibility study as well would tend to be used for new, but actually it depends on the scope of change that you're bringing in by this new manufacturing facility. Okay, so that's Lisa. So we've pretty much said yes to everything, but I think if you were in Lisa's position, you'd probably use maybe 2 or 3 of those. So if I recap them, which 2 or 3, if you make a note, either in the message board or tell me, would you use? So we've got forecasting. Yeah, you want to cover your back. Well, and there's a lot of that where for managers as well, where if you're put in that position, the more evidence you can provide to substantiate what you're saying, the less personal risk you're taking. So as I mentioned, I want you to pick a maximum of 3 of these you've got that Lisa's going to use. Forecasting, a decision tree, cost benefit analysis, Porter's 5 forces, PESTL, SWOT, or a feasibility study. So that's forecasting, decision tree, PESTL, SWOT, feasibility, cost benefit analysis, or Porter's 5 forces. Which 3 do you reckon? If you can't remember all 3, just the top one will do.
I think maybe definitely forecasting and cost benefit.
Okay, and we've got cost benefit is agreed by Grace, thank you, who also thinks PESTL and decision tree. Got on Kaylee is my other regular contributor. What do you reckon? PESTL, cost analysis, and decision tree. Wow, so you're with Grace there. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. So we're going to move on to Davesh. So he is a personal assistant in a diversified industrial company. He's trusted by the CEO, who's just heard that they've got they're potentially going to acquire a business that complements what they already do, the core business. So he's been asked to be part of a steering group to evaluate whether they should buy this company or not. Okay, so we're going to go back to the same tools. I'm not going to explain them all because hopefully by now we should be familiar with them. So forecasting, do we reckon forecasting would be a good tool for Davesh to use? So the buying a company, it does something, potentially buying a company, so it does something a little bit different but complementary to what they already do. So what do we reckon? Should we forecast?
Yeah, probably, because it will show if the trends are good in that new business.
Yeah, or whether it's dying in some way, in which case we probably wouldn't want to go for it. Okay. Forecast, cost, etc. Yes, okay. You think Porter's 5 forces is great? Yes, because we've said before, haven't we? That's a good one if you're going to enter a new market. Okay. Yep. Decision tree, what do we reckon for that? So this is where we've got one option or another option, and then we like branch it out.
I think this one could be a bit more risky because they perhaps wouldn't know what the outcomes are going to be.
Yeah. It all depends on what data we've got to hand. So Kaylee's saying it could possibly be useful. I think it'd be harder to use for this one actually, unless we've got a set of criteria that the business is going to go in a certain direction and we're going to do this or we're going to do that. So yeah, I think it could be harder to use. Cost benefit analysis, would we use that?
Yeah, because it would show that it's going to be a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. So when are we going to get our returns? Yeah, absolutely. Kaylee's saying yes, it would be useful to use it. Yeah, how likely are we to, if we're making a really big strategic decision? So I think it was when Morrison's decided to go for, I think I mentioned this to you before, to get the vans in, like so they could do the deliveries. I don't know if they partnered up with a separate business or whether they did it themselves, but they certainly, in terms of cost benefit analysis, it was 5 years they worked out before they got their returns on that. But the risk is, if we're down to Porter's 5 forces, if all the competitors are doing it, there is a risk that they'll then lose more business on the way unless they do it. So okay, so cost benefit analysis we think would be really helpful. We've already mentioned, Grace has, that Porter's 5 forces could be really useful because we're looking at the landscape of the market, who's got the power, suppliers, competitors, whether we're likely to prove it a success, then more people enter the market, whether people are buying substitutes. So does anyone else, is anyone else's thoughts on Porter's 5 forces for this type of decision where we're looking at buying a new business? Okay, we'll leave that one then. So a pestle, do we think that would be helpful in this situation? Yeah, so thank you, Kaylee, for Porter's 5 forces. Yeah, it would be a good idea. It maps out the whole landscape, doesn't it, really, in terms of a competitive environment and power plays. So in terms of pestle, would we draw up a pestle for this, do you think?
Yeah, because it draws upon the broader environment.
Yeah. Yes, and again, I mean, they're all very complementary, aren't they, really? But yes, it gives us a really good picture in terms of the sustainability and trends that are going on. Yeah, and Kelly agrees with you there. That's good. Do you think the organisation should come up with a SWOT to see how complementary it is, the idea? Yeah, and yes, absolutely. So Grace saying yes because we understand the internal, external factors. So yeah, I think you could identify then, couldn't you, whether it's a really good fit or not, and potentially what resource we've got in terms of taking it forward. Now, I mentioned before feasibility studies as a planning tool to see whether an idea is worth pursuing or not. So this is whether it's workable, profitable, and it's all this viability of the idea. So do we think this situation lends itself to a feasibility study?
Yeah, because it would probably confirm that it would be profitable for the company.
Yeah, so I think this has got a much more natural fit than it did for Lisa's situation, doesn't it? Because it's more of a new market. So yeah, if you're looking at how it's going to work in the future, that sounds really good. And then we've got the decision tree, the SWOT, the feasibility. Okay, I think in terms of tools then, which do you think of the ones we've covered? So again, recap them for you. Forecasting, decision tree, cost benefit analysis, Porter's 5 forces, pestle, SWOT and feasibility. You can only pick one this time. because he hasn't got long to prepare and he's not very experienced. So which one should he do in order to be equipped as part of the steering group to decide whether or not to go for this new venture? Forecasting. Okay, yep. So we're looking at what the market trends are. So that's Kaylee's. Anyone would anyone choose a different one?
Maybe feasibility.
Okay, yep. So that's the one where it's this looking at the size of the market, suppliers, distributors. So that feels a little bit like a sort of a bridge between Porter's 5 forces, isn't it, and forecasting. Okay. Grace, are you going to stick with your Porter's 5 forces or are you going for something else? Yeah, Porter's 5 forces. Okay, so we've got 3 different tools that we'd use for this. So some of this depends on like how comfortable you are in terms of using the different frameworks available. So we've got one final situation, and this time we've got Bob. Now Bob is in sales, okay? So he's in a business services company, and he's heard a proposal which will involve him changing the company's price structure radically. Okay, so we've got our tools, we've got our forecasting. Do we feel he should forecast if he's looking at changing all the prices of the products and services they offer?
Yeah, I think you definitely need to forecast.
And what sort of forecast would you want to know if you're looking at changing pricing?
To just see the trends and how much profit you could be making or would lose.
Okay, yeah. And that ties in nicely with what Kaylee's saying about cost benefit analysis. Kaylee, are you able to switch your mic back on? Or and Grace as well, cost benefit. Kaylee, I was just keen to understand, in terms of cost benefit analysis, what are you thinking? Like, what are we going to be? What exactly, how do you see it being used?
Basically, I think with the cost benefit, you've got to work out your pros and cons.
Yes.
Because if you're going about upping all your prices, you're at the risk of then losing regular customer base.
Absolutely. And I mean, when it says a radical overhaul, there's no way on earth I can imagine they're going to reduce the prices, are they? So looking at increasing them. If we're looking at doing that in a current situation, that is such a risky strategy to do, because you're already, as soon as you do a price change, if you've got to alter the contracts you've got in place, you've got to give people a chance to get out of the contracts, haven't you?
Yeah. I'm one of these. I'm terrible for it. If I go to a shop that I know is normally charging a set price for one item and it's gone up, I'm like, well, I ain't paying it, and I'll walk off.
So, have you heard of the concept of price elasticity of demand?
Probably not.
Okay, so it's in economics, and the idea with it is that there's a rational relationship. So actually, if you charge a little bit more, you'll lose a few customers, and the idea is that we're all very rational, and if you put your prices up, so the more you put your prices up, the fewer customers you'll have, and it's sort of what you've got to try and do is work out your maximum profitability. So you price it at a level that you get the maximum number of customers without losing them. But there's some products and services that the more expensive they are, the more you'll sell. Can you think of any examples of those?
You can get that with furniture.
Yeah, handbags as well, potentially, or things where they're seen as luxury goods. And actually, if you increase the price, you increase the perception of trust in them. And then there's other ones where it's sort of the opposite relationship, where they're sort of really called gifting goods, where they're really cheap and like pasta and things that you sort of are almost seen as staple products. But yeah, with this, the cost benefit analysis, you'd be looking at your returns. You see, traditionally, right, so cost benefit tends to be about an investment. So you're looking at, if you pay this, what do you get back and when do you get the money back? But I think you're thinking about using it in a different way, really. If you're changing the prices, I think it might be, you mean using it more in the sense of forecasting. If we're upping our prices, what are the likely implications in terms of reduction of sales, aren't we?
Probably.
Is that no? But it sort of sounds more like it would work. But it's more, cost benefit is more about buying something and seeing what the returns are. And in our case, we're not buying anything. We're just changing our prices and seeing what the returns are. Okay. Do we think the decision trees at all useful in this one?
It could be useful if you can work it. If you could figure out what your what your pros and cons could be, so you can then have it as a visual for where it could go right or where it could go wrong.
Yeah. So we look at the implications of things, but again, the drawback I see of the decision tree is you need a very certain environment data to use it, because we need to know if we do this, the implications are that or that. But actually, until you put your prices up, you really don't know as to what the implications are going to be, because even if people say they're going to move, sometimes they can't be bothered, or sometimes it's a period down the line. So I think the decision tree is a really simplistic way of almost making quite decisions with few consequences. It could be used very well then. So, if we're going to go for a certain type of Christmas meal, do we do this or do we do that? But actually, for something like this could really, really shape the success of the business, couldn't it? So we've mentioned cost benefit analysis. Porter's 5 forces, is that one going to be useful here?
I don't think it would be that useful because it's not exactly a new business or venture, is it? They're just hiking the prices.
No, the only way it might be useful is if we've got a competitor that's like chomping at the we really think could sweep up our competition, and if we're looking to put our prices up, that's going to be their chance, isn't it? So I think that's the only way, is just understanding if there is a significant threat of substitutes. Yes, they might buy something different, or they might buy nothing. They might actually consider it's just a luxury, so we don't need it. So yes, I think, Ellie, I agree with you on that. I think that's a good point. Our SWOT analysis, would we do that? Pestle, you think? Okay, so why would we do Pestle rather than a SWOT?
You're looking at the bigger picture. So you're looking at all of everything in one go, instead of it just being the SWOT again, where Emily was saying it could be bias. So you might not know how much in the way of competition or substitutes there might be out there against the business that could try and undercut you and possibly take your customer away.
Okay. So we're getting a whole picture of the market if we use the pestle. I would argue in this case the SWOT could be amazing, and the reason being, if you are genuinely, and if you get it used properly, so you actually get your customers contributing into it, you can actually see how much better you are than the competition, if you are at all. Because if your strengths are such that you actually could justify putting up the price right, then you can communicate around that as well and talk about the extra services that you provide. But actually, if you're putting your prices up and you've got some massive weaknesses, you should sort those out, because otherwise you shouldn't be putting your price, do you know what I mean? So I think, can you understand why I think a SWOT might be helpful in terms of a really honest appraisal as to whether we've actually got the capacity? Yeah, I think it could really work well. And actually you could just say, look, I agree with the price overhaul, but I'll tell you what, if we're going to do that, first of all, we've got to sort this out. We've got to do that. Or actually, we're not in a strong enough position to do it. Feasibility study. Given this is about going into a new market, etc., I'm going to write it off. What do you think? I don't think it's relevant in this case, unless we were developing some new offerings. Anyone disagree on that? Okay, good. So we're saying that we're going to write off feasibility. So back to Bob, and here's his overall sort of looking at whether he should put the pricing up or not, and a radical, and how he's going to consider it. We're allowing him just one tool to use. So forecasting, decision tree, cost benefit analysis, Porter's 5 forces, a SWOT, a pestle, or a feasibility study. Which one are you voting for? Forecasting, yeah, okay, Emily, that's, yeah, and I understand because you explained about that, which feeds into our sales, our implications, etc., the marketplace. Very good. SWOT forecasting, Kaylee having 2 there, but yeah, okay, you can have that. So yeah, so we're looking at what's going ahead, but also our internal position on it and some external forces. Very good. Grace, you're going to end the session by coming up with your favourite. Anyone? Go on, we'll have one more. Yeah, go on then, do it. Which one's your favourite for this situation? You love Porter's 5 forces, don't you? You're a big fan. I'd expect when I'm marking your work anonymously, if it's got it mentioned, I'll know it's you. Fantastic. Thank you very much, particularly those of you that really contributed your ideas for it. It's just to make sure that we understand the implications and so hopefully adds a bit more value than just reading the article. So yeah, thank you very much for the session. I hope you have a lovely weekend. I'll see you again at 10:15 on Tuesday, and in our group thing, I will. I know Macy and Lauren have got some problems on the chat facility, and as you know, I am trying to look into that and sort out what we can do on that. And so I'll add video on Aula, and I will. No, thank you. And I will also send you something in the chat facility before Tuesday so that you can prepare for it. So I hope you have a good day in college or at CU Coventry on Monday. A nice weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you. Bye bye.